listening to the Born Primitive podcast.
Let's transition a little bit. I feel like we've covered kind of the business side and gave a general recap, and I know we certainly didn't. We weren't in the weeds as far as to specifics.
It was a little less Born Primitive and more just kind of general business, but I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's good. But I want to make sure we save some time for personal things.
Yep.
So reflect and feel free to take it where you want, but I'd love to hear like any just overarching or big takeaways that you had this year. And of course it can relate still to your time here professionally here at Born Primitive, but would love to just hear anything you've been wrestling with on the personal side, any wins, any losses, any things you're still kind of or anything you still have top of mind right now.
I think similar to what we kind of just talked about, but this definitely bleeds over into personal, and I think we can probably all relate to this because of the age of social media and just these damn electronics that we have glued to us. We're all, I think, way too accessible to each other. And it ends up, I think it leads to a lot of anxiety for people. Definitely does for me. It's like, man, how awesome would it be to just have a fucking landline again? Where like only your best buddies know your number. And like the only reason they're going to call you is if it's significant, because they're not going to call you and be like, hey, check this meme out. Like, you know what I mean? Like that was like a barrier to action because it was like, oh, I'll see him tomorrow. I'll just tell him then. You know what I mean? So even when it's just friendly banter on a text thread with your buddies, that can be very disruptive, you know, when you're trying to unwind in an evening and you end up having to do deliberate things like put it on airplane mode and throw it in the drawer, things like that, which I think we're all getting more aware of how this is just fucking ruining us. So I think we're in the right direction. But for me, and I think it's similar to the example I gave earlier. It's like I feel obligated to respond to everyone. This is mainly Instagram, but also text. But it's worse in Instagram because I think all these people think, oh, because I follow this guy, I can send him a message and like he should respond. You know what I mean? And for a while I did because I was like, oh, it's the right thing to do. And a lot of times it's really positive stuff with the brand. So like I want to be like, hey man, right on. Like I appreciate you repping the brand and like thanks so much for like I love the fact that you love the shoes. Like good luck training. I would try to send messages like that because I generally was appreciative, but I realized I was allocating time in the evening to like, oh, I need to respond to everyone that like sent me something like that. And it was just an energy suck. And I'm like, all right, what is the actual drawback if I don't respond to this guy? Like, is he going to think I'm an asshole? And I had to kind of, you know, chew on that a little bit because I defaulted to, yes, this guy's going to think I'm a dick, that he's too good to respond to me. And it's like, no, man, it's because I have a bunch of DM requests that I'm never going to look at. And once I start responding, now you know what I mean? So I'm still working through that because again, it's like you never want to get too big for your britches and you got to always remember your roots. But at the same time, you know, you just can't allow everyone access to your life and that like needs things. And dude, I get customer service DMs like, hey, I ordered a medium and like, I think I should be a large. I meant to get a large. Like, what should I do? And I have to type out, hey man, email contact bornprimitive.com. Like it's a great team. They'll take care of you. But just that alone, that's like a mental energy at 9 o'clock at night when I could be unwinding and like, you know what I mean? Stretching and like do anything other than responding to a guy who's DMing me about because he ordered the wrong size when we're doing, you know, 1,500 orders a day. You know what I mean? So I've had to really get over that of like, okay, set boundaries with people. You're not accessible to everyone and stick to it and be content that if a few people think you're an asshole because of that, then who fucking cares? You don't even know these people. That doesn't affect the brand. Even if they go talk a bunch of shit. Oh, the guy didn't respond to your DM. No one else is going to think anything of that. Right. So, but I've had to wrestle with that because for a while I was a total opposite. And I realized like, you know how much time I'm wasting in a week responding to these fucking messages? And I don't even have a lot of, I have like what, I don't know, 12,000, 13,000, not at all. Imagine the people that have 500,000, you know, once it gets so big, I'm sure you just can't even check at all. But when you're in that middle ground where you're still kind of reachable, like it's this weird thing. And you know what I mean? And it's like, it comes with the territory a little bit. Like I get it. But I think some people, like just want companionship and they just try to latch on to people to try to get it. And it's like, hey man, I don't even know you. But you know, and then, you know, obviously that happens on your phone too with text messages, but typically those are people at least a little vetted that like, all right, you have my number, so we're probably friends. But then sometimes those can be worse because then there's actually more pressure to respond. Because it's like, well, shit, this is my buddy. Like, but this is man, this is going to take a lot of bandwidth for me to come up with a response to this, whatever it is. And it's a long day and I'm stressed. And then before you know it, you accidentally forget to respond. And 3 weeks later you go, oh shit, I forgot to respond to so-and-so. So now you're stressed out and you got to apologize. Hey man, sorry I got back to you. Whereas some people would just be content with like, all right, I can't add value there. I'm just not going to respond to this. And I envy those people
I feel
that just don't give a fuck.
I reset all the time with people. And it's usually, it'll be like an aunt or something to be like, hey, you didn't, it's like, guys, right now we're on, and I'm very upfront with people. And I do my best. Like on Sunday, I will take some intentional time. And it's not as if I don't reply to anyone, but my friends know, and it's like anything, like if you build an expectation that you're going to answer every 2 minutes, then when you don't, people are like almost like more likely to be texting and calling you more. But like, I very much, and it isn't, I truly, and I'm going to get into like something I wrote down while you were talking. It's like, I have to protect my time and maintain myself so I can show up the best. And what I've realized is the more I'm attached to that thing, the less that I'm able to show up the best version of myself. Now, of course, that shifts over time. And I'll be very upfront now that like, I think it's just, and Elise and I were talking about this, is that like the crazier with our third now that got added, I found myself on my phone more. And it's because I think there are times where I do want to just read about fantasy football or something because it's like,
you need a break.
Yeah. But what you already have, I have to, it is a slippery slope. Now, not in the same sense of like doing cocaine to cope, but like in the sense of like I start to realize, oh shit, instead of going to bed at 9:50, I was reading this dumb thing that I didn't need to. And now it's 10:45 and I wake up and feel a little different. So what I wrote down, and it relates to what you're saying about like feeling the pressure to respond to people is, and I everyone has their own flavor of how they coin this. I call it like state maintenance, is if you realize an action or a habit is going against what you know makes you feel best. Now there should be some grace in there. You should, if you want to burn it down, like and drink 20 beers in a night and it's a conscious decision, do that. But if it's these subtle little things that you're just
We've all been there.
Yeah, of course. and you should do that. That's part of being a human. But if you're doing these small, subtle things that take away from like you showing up best, even just like when I say showing up best, like feeling energized, feeling connected, like feeling refreshed, if you're doing a bunch of little shit and validating it, saying, oh, I want to make other people feel good about this, like you're actually just, that's like a catch-22. You're really just taking away from yourself. You're almost prostituting yourself out to other people. Yeah. So little things like that, I'm happy you brought that up, because I think that in like I said, even right now where I'm at, I'm feeling a little pull of the same thing. But I think when you get really clear and confident on who you want to be, eventually you just reach a spot where you're like, okay, I can't maintain this anymore. And I can imagine, I mean, even in my time here, I've watched over the last 3 years, and my friends, when we go get beers together, we have a guys trip we do each year. They laugh at me for it, but it's like, guys, if you would see my phone on a daily basis, and I know yours is too, like I think you would have a little more understanding as to why it does take me 2 days to respond to our group message. It's like, if I'm trying to keep up with that, and it sounds like maybe you do keep up with it, it drives me insane, because it's a different energetic exchange too. When you're looking at your phone and interacting all the time, it's like it feels good at times because it's good to be connected, but it's connecting in a different way that I think is here to stay. Like we are going to be connected digitally for the rest of human history or forward looking. But if that's at the detriment of connecting in person, I'll take the in-person connection all the time and let that kind of fade away, at least on like in an evening or something like that.
Yeah. And I think, there's effects on like our dopamine receptors,
for sure.
Right? And I've seen some stuff on that where particularly more so social media than like text messages. But as we've talked about many times, and Michael Easter talked about this in great detail about the psychology of a slot machine and how that now, is being played out in social media, and that potential reward concept and rapid repeatability and all these things he talked about. For me, it's Instagram because that's the only one I use. But the way it addicts you to just mindlessly scrolling, looking at shit that adds no literal value to your life. Now, there's a lot of funny stuff, and like, so maybe you could argue there's some comedic value or relief, but there's just a lot of also distractions. And then, I think particularly with like young girls, it's so horrible because then it becomes this big comparison thing where they're all using filters because they think they all need to, you know what I mean? Like with my daughter, when she's that age, like that's going to terrify me because I don't want her to think, all right, well, those girls that are Victoria's Secret, like they have all these filters and they got airbrushed and like they have hair lady offset, like off camera, and they got perfect makeup. Like that's not normal. You don't have to look like that. But it's so there's so many just horrible things I think from social media. But with the dopamine receptors, I noticed that I was starting to feel less joy in my day-to-day life on things that used to bring joy. You know what I mean? Like example would be like around Christmas time, like it's a magical time and you feel the vibe and it's just a little subdued. Or like if I'm sitting down in the unlikely event, I have 3 hours to myself and I'm going to watch like a big football game and it's on a Saturday and it's like the primetime game. Like normally I'd be hyped for that all day. Like this is going to be awesome. I'm going to get some wings. I'm going to drink a few beers. I'd be legit pumped for that. Now I'm still pumped for that, but it's a little subdued. And I think for me, I'm realizing that I think I need like the dopamine detox for some of it is social media, because I've noticed when I've been deliberate about unplugging it and I went back to the basics, I felt so refreshed. And this is such a stupid example, but I remember a couple of weeks ago, I went out because, I live on the beach and there's a big sand dune in front of, you've been there, and there's all these weeds popping up that it's supposed to be just the beach grass, but there's all these, and I don't want to overrun like my dune. So I went out there with a shovel. I put on some classic rock and had a cold beer, and I just started taking the shovel to these weeds, and I was just ripping weeds out for like an hour and a half. And I had the garbage can out there. And then I went into the garage, moved the radio into the garage. I started cleaning the garage out, organizing some of my old military gear, and, was moving the weights around. And like I did like 4 hours of just activity that would have been like shit, 10 years ago when I lived in Indiana. That would have been like a normal Saturday. And I went back into the house. I had not looked at my phone once because I kept it in the kitchen. And I was like, holy shit, I feel incredible. And I was just literally out there with a shovel listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival, right? And I was like, and that was a validation for me. It's like, dude, it's not that complicated. You're just glued to this fucking thing and it's killing you, So I think that's something we all need to be aware of. But goddamn, it's like the devil, man. It's designed to keep you to it. So it takes incredible willpower because that's how it's designed, man. You know what I mean? And they pretend like it's not you've reached your daily limit, Instagram. And we all click ignore every fucking time. So they're like, we're trying our best. It's like, no, you're not. You're designing this like a fucking slot machine. So you put your phone in your pocket. If there's 2 minutes of inactivity, what are you doing? You're literally pulling your phone out of your pocket and you're going back to Instagram. You were just on it 2 minutes ago. Nothing has changed, but that's what you see people doing, right? So I think that's something for me is I'm kind of trying to work through, because it would be liberating and freeing to be like, all right, this is not a ball and chain. I'm not connected to this anymore. I don't need that, but it's easier said than done. And the annoying part about us is like, I have to stay on it to monitor like, all right, now reels are big. And now like I need to know the landscape of social media because that's a huge part of our marketing, right? So if I just say, you know what, I'm deleting my Instagram, that's kind of a non-starter, because then I have no understanding of a major component of how we market our brand. And then I become the dinosaur of like, you know what I mean? Like imagine trying to stay up with that when you haven't been on the platform in 2 years. And then all of a sudden you need to like make a decision where that's a component of your strategy. And I'm sitting there with no clue what's going on because it's changed. So that's like the dilemma with me is like, I kind of need to, but I feel like you can do it way less. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that have battled that boundary. And at least we're becoming more aware, I think, of the dangers of it. But the next phase is actually just drawing a line in the sand and taking hard action on it, For sure.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, it's media, it's the foods we eat, it's what we drink. It's wild. Like and I would consider like us probably definitely in a top percentile as far as like our level of awareness of those things, how we're moving, how we're eating, how we're drinking. And it's still a challenge. So it's something I try to stay extremely disciplined or aware on. And then also watch like how certain individuals, and this isn't a judgment, it's just an observation, how like are just consumed by it. Meaning like their food is taking away from their energy. They're consuming media that's taking away from their energy. So like when they're extremely overweight and cannot show up in a way that's energized, it's like, guys, it should be no shock. And then you scale that out over a country. And that's why like I have spoken so passionately about like some of the things even RFK is looking to bring to the table. It's like, you do realize that a lot of things are just leeches for our energy. And if we want to like kind of heal collectively, we've got to start to cut away some of those leeches, meaning the foods we're eating, even media having, and by no means is I certainly goes against every value I have to say that like we should be regulating and people can't sell things and can't sell certain foods. No, I think you should be able to buy whatever you want. I'm libertarian in that sense, but what I do think has to happen is we have to educate correctly, both from from our children, and then also start to understand and it be an open discussion. But what happens is these billion-trillion-dollar corporations completely start to buy the narrative. And I saw that when I was in college, and I continue to see it's the fucking research that comes down the pipe. I'm sorry, if you've done any level of self kind of education, you'll look at some of these studies and be like, this is bullshit. And now that's why I told you to listen to and for all the listeners, I'll say it again, the Mike Benz episode on Joe Rogan, is because he clearly, and this dude was a corporate lawyer and then transitioned into censorship. He's showing that like a lot of these universities are just an arm of these corporations, which are an arm of certain agencies within the U.S. government, and how you can't it in no way is this true academic research. There's billions of dollars being pumped into specifically the pharmaceutical industries to support. I mean, we did it with cholesterol for fucking decades, and people still within academia, people within academia,
high cholesterol.
Well, still, and now it's happening with seed oils, and I actually know some individuals who are in academia who still will argue with me. That seed oils are healthy, and it's like, guys, I'm no expert, but please just read these two books and listen to this gentleman who knows fully both sides of this and where them saying that they're good for you is coming from. It's bought and paid for by these huge corporations. Yep. So those types of things, just me ending up ranting about it. It relates though to the social media too. Is like we're in a unique time because it's connected us more than ever, and we have more choices than ever. But there is kind of the monkey brain side of us that we have to get in check, because if not, we're just living these lives of like these subtle addictions that just control us, both social media and the foods and what we're consuming, even on television. So yeah, that actually relates to one I told you I wanted to talk about. That's been it's kind of been like an overarching, just like almost mantra, a theme that I'm just reflecting on. And I do have some action things, as far as how I'm kind of unpacking it, but I thought it was something other people could relate to. And it was an interesting one because it kind of seeded in my psyche early in the year. And then it really got legs and has become, as I said, something that I'm constantly addressing. And it's the stories we tell ourselves. And that's kind of how I've framed it throughout the year. And it was me kind of reflecting on, and when I say stories we tell ourselves, I mean it quite literally, is that there were these subtle narratives. And I think anyone that's self-aware realizes that throughout the day, you're constantly talking to yourself, and that you have almost a representation of yourself that you're, other people, of course, get glimpses of because you're interacting and communicating all the time. But then there's also subtleties that you keep to yourself. And why it became so pertinent is like truly was self-reflecting in kind of a meditative state of like, why do I still say that? Or why do I still feel that way? Or why do I still have that insecurity? And where I want to drill down most is in the insecurity realm of it, because that's where I realized, and upon reflecting, realized that there were a lot of things from, say, when I was 11 or 12, and I'll be open, and you've heard me talk about this before, is like, even for me as being, I was so tall at such a young age, and I was extremely thin. And my dad and brother would rag on me the way that dad and brother should, in a sense. But like, for some reason, I kind of internalized it as this like extreme insecurity, which then resulted in like almost feeling like, and that's why I told you it's been a great exercise this last month of us having our third daughter, is not being able to work out, because working out when I was 12, it finally gave me the opportunity to be like, oh, I'll put on muscle then, I'll get bigger. And it's good. It's a double-edged sword where like, yes, working out, putting on muscle, even eating more. But there were times almost similar, I would call it like the male body dysmorphia. And it was worse it was probably the worst when I was in college, where I realized in moments of stressful times, that would become something I would like quadruple and double, or like double down, triple down, quadruple down on, and start like just thinking like, okay, I need to just lift my ass off, eat. I was slamming protein shakes, realizing that like it was good for putting on weight and muscle, but like I didn't feel better when I was doing that. Now, as you know, I'm still very passionate about working out and taking care of my body and being strong, which I think everybody should at least strive to be have some level of strength. But my relationship with it has changed a ton as I've addressed that story that I realized was stemming from a really young age. So that's just a specific example. I could name out a ton, but for the sake of time, I won't. But I think it's just I've been talking with a lot of my friends to say, like, be open about those things and have discussions, because you realize it's almost like the scary monster in the closet. And as soon as you open that door and address it, it kind of disperses right away. But as long as you let it be the scary monster in the closet, it's taking up mental energy, and you don't realize how those little things are affecting how you show up, both for yourself and other people. And then what happens is that belief structure results in actions, and then actions are shaping your reality. So there may be 4 insecurities, and I'm sorry, you can sense this on people, like, oh, you got something you haven't really dealt with, and play that out to the most extreme is like, and God bless people that like have something like a serious trauma, like a sexual assault or something at a young age. Now, I'm not saying I've never dealt with that. So like, of course I don't want to speak for them, but you can sense on individuals when they have that monster that they've never worked through. So these are micro examples, but I think it really feels like a cleanup, and almost like you're going in with like a fine tooth comb and saying like, hey, I want to be proud, and I want to feel calm and centered within the way I show up every day. And what I've found, the more you go in and address those stories, and it's not about banishing it either. It's just about observing and saying like, hey, I see you there. Like I see that story I used to tell myself, but I'm not that person anymore. And I think like anything, the more you exercise kind of that, and I'll pause there because I actually like, there's a tactic that Paul Chek, who's I consider a mentor of mine, you replace that statement with something else. So like for mine, that example I just gave would be like, you used to feel like you were skinny, but that doesn't serve you anymore. And I'm making this up in real time. Like you replace it with something that reconfirms a different way of thinking about it. And then anytime it bubbles up, which it's going to, and it probably never fully goes away, you say like, hey, I see you there, but, and you create like a caveat or an if statement to kind of go against it. So this is like the nerdy side of me nerding out on like kind of our psychology and then how that affects our actions and behaviors. But I just thought that was a good one because it's been such forefront for me of like getting in there and being unafraid to kind of reflect on, in these things, it doesn't have to be from when you're a kid. These can happen when you're 20, 25, you have something traumatic or even something good where you realize it's inflating your ego. It's like, go in there and knock that down a little bit because it just gives you it sands the edges and makes you a little more well-balanced.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think most of us have something from childhood that shapes behavior later on. Sometimes it takes a little while to realize like, oh shit, that's why I'm like that. Cause I always wonder, and I think I'm pretty certain on this, being the youngest of 3 brothers, the dynamic I was in was both of my older brothers were great athletes. Right. To the point where like, Matt was all-state in 3 sports and was the conference MVP in all 3 sports. And like that last name, and of course it's not like big time stuff, but in Northwest Indiana, even in Indiana, that last name started getting recognized because of what my brothers had done. Mike was all-state in tennis and baseball, team MVP, like the whole deal. And then my little ass comes along and I'm the third handling, right? So there's expectations. And I developed late physically, right? Like I hit puberty late, I think, relatively. So I was just underdeveloped and undersized when, there's those kids that hit puberty in like 6th grade and then they're like little phenoms in middle school because it's like, dude, you have leg hair in 6th grade. Like, holy shit. You know what I mean? You're scary. So there's, you compound it with that. So, I get to high school and particularly on the football front, there's big expectations. Oh, there's a third one coming. You know what I mean? And Matt was everything and all-time leading rusher at Valpo. And like the dude just dominated everything. He was insane. Definitely the most talented of all 3 of us. And Mike was second. I was probably third. But I took that as like, I need to become a hyper achiever, right? I became obsessed with accomplishment because I wanted to prove all these people wrong. And I felt incredible pressure. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I probably was manifesting that in my own head. But there was so much, I was so self-conscious about not living up to the name that I just turned into an absolute maniac. It helped, I lived in the weight room. I committed to eating like a horse. I, would be up till midnight studying, I took all the AP classes. Like I wanted to be really good academically. So it led me to be a little focused maniac. Lawn mowing business on the side. If I wasn't working out, I was mowing lawns or studying a book. Right. So I guess like, that part worked out, but I carried that same mentality is pretty much until now, where I have this like obligation to be a hyper achiever. And yes, there are benefits to that, but there's also collateral damage in your life that will produce, because you got to be a little bit nuts to take that approach, right? And now I'm 36, and I'm like, all right, like, can I take the foot off the gas a little, or do I always have to have the next thing? Like, you know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, well, as soon as you've conquered this, like immediately do this.
And it's what we just, and I told you I'm referencing, I heard it on Diary of a CEO, which is a great podcast if you've never listened to it. And they were talking about that exact thing of like, and it actually relates to what I said about like the stories you tell yourself, like, be careful not to continue to live in a narrative that no longer serves you. Meaning like, using your example, like that hustle and grit, like nothing of what we're saying or what I'm saying should be viewed as like, oh, that's a bad story that I told myself. It's like, no, that was a great story to get you to hear, but is that story still serving you? And if it's yes, like, or if it's yes, a little bit, but not in these aspects, it's like, hey, rewrite that a little bit and do a new, kind of an updated version of that, to better suit your life. And that's what they were talking about, to give the specific example of how they were referencing it, is when he sold his first business, he called his mentor, and I think he was 32 at the time, and said like, okay, here's what I'm going to do next. I'm ready to go. And his mentor, who was much more seasoned than him, said like, take a fucking year. Take a year and don't do anything. Meaning like, don't start anything new. You can still have hobbies and whatnot, but like, you're set up financially for the rest of your life. Take a year and don't do anything. And when he was like surprised and shocked and asked why he recommended doing that, he said like, you're going to take like that hustle and that grit you had to make this happen. You just solve for it financially. Now, if you keep doing that mentality over and over, you're just going to exhaust yourself. He's like, give yourself a year and see now what the new thing you want to solve for is, because you just solved for all before. And here's where they get in. I'll paraphrase just to keep this rolling, but like they got into the nuance of the mentor knowing that like he wanted to solve for the financial need because he grew up poor and all this. So he's like, you just solved the exact thing you told, like, he's like, you told me that that's what you were solving for. You solved it. And now you want to keep solving for it. He's like, no, like that. And what a great mentor to say that. And I think it applies to what you said of like, and those are the people I appreciate most in my life, because you see them growing in a way like, whoa, like almost like a phone, like you're doing software updates of like, you get too stuck on a thread, it makes you one dimensional. Whereas when you realize like, okay, I figured that out, now let's solve for something else, you start to, and it relates to the book Range, which I love. Like you start to build a range where you can step into any room and you're adding value from a weird angle because you've explored these different things and not got too kind of one dimensional on something. Now there's a time to be one dimensional, but if it's always your MO for operating, I think it kind of like it narrows the scope at which you're able to see reality.
Yeah, no, it's spot on, man. You know, for me, it's like it's a dilemma because mine, you know, as I kind of explained, it was kind of just that underdog mentality that motivated me to kind of prove people wrong and this and that. But I still carry that now, obviously, mainly with Born Primitive. But some of it is actually true. We are still an underdog, I could say, because we could have raised $50 million by now. And imagine, throw that into our marketing budget. You fucking kidding me? You imagine the shit we would do with how good we are at, you know, leverage. We haven't had that because we've had to bootstrap this whole thing. So, you know, from that context, we still are the fucking underdog. You see the things that are pinned up on my wall in my office. There's plenty of fucking bulletin board material of people counting us out over the years, and we're still getting it, right? There's a local bank here that didn't approve us for a fucking loan. They said there was too much risk with our fucking business, right? So are you fucking kidding me? You guys are a mile down the road. We're about to build a 58,000 square foot facility. You guys are the biggest bank, and you're not going to align with like the brand of Born Primitive when I need a loan to build a $16 million building. You're saying there's too much risk? What? I immediately printed that shit out. That went up on the wall. I fucking love that, because guess what? In 2 years, when that thing's built and we're cutting the ribbon, like I'm going to say you're never getting our business ever again. Right? You met with us for 30 minutes and now you think you understand our business? Are you fucking kidding me? So I wrestle with that, because those are the things that fire me the fuck up. When I don't want to work, I go to that wall and I read those things and I'm like, let's fucking go. I'll stay here till midnight. Let's burn this place to the ground tonight. Right? It really does help me. But I think you got to use it sparingly, because like you can only hit that NOS button so many times. And you also don't want to adopt kind of like an angry disposition because you're always against the world, right?
Exactly.
So I think you got to find a way to weaponize it the right way. So I still wrestle with it, right? I like being the underdog, but at a certain point, it's like, okay, you're playing in the SEC now, man. You're not an underdog anymore. You're with the big dogs. You're in the big leagues, and you've earned it, and you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just keep doing what you're doing. So I don't know. Clearly, I'm still working through that.
But I think the analogy I use personally is like, I think we build up masks to wear, meaning like, you have a mask you wear when you're with the closest people you know. And I think it gets truer to like what I would call your true essence, or like, and here we could end up in a conversation about like what I would call like your God essence. But then it's very natural, and you have to, in order to like build a healthy integrated ego, you put on a mask every time. I put on a mask here when I'm here managing people, or when I'm at the grocery store. But what I love about that analogy is that I've always viewed it as like, I'm like, they're my God, the essence of who I am on a soul level is sitting in this really comfy chair. And then I always picture a room that just has masks lined up around it. And I think as you learn to take those on and off, you realize that like if I identify with too much of these, that's a trap. Meaning like, if I put one of these on and start to think that I'm a businessman, or I'm an athlete, or I'm a father, it's like, no, I am those things, but there's something deeper than all of those. So I keep them on the shelf. And it's like that. It's just a good analogy to always stay like, hey, don't get over identified with any one way of being, because then you're pigeonholing yourself. Whereas I think like the beauty of being a human is that we are so adaptable. Now, what I'm saying either should not be that you're just always a chameleon. It's like, you should have your foundation, that kind of thing that's sitting in the comfy chair. Like, that is who I am at my roots. But then when you need to put on a different mask, you reach to the wall, you put it on. And then when it's time to take it off, you take the fucking thing off. Yeah. Because like, no one wants to be in the room either with like, in social media is the perfect example of this. Like the Liver King. It's like somebody who puts a mask on and then thinks that all of a sudden that they are that mask. It's like, oof, like It doesn't age well. And it very quickly, people start to sniff that out. So that's just, that's a personal analogy I use a lot, because it keeps that, and it kind of keeps the ego in check, because people love too to be like, oh, the ego is the enemy. And it's like, yes. And I shouldn't say that. His book's amazing. Ryan Holiday, the one he wrote that's called Ego is the Enemy. But you need a healthy ego in order to operate as a human on this earth. But what you can't do is get too attached to that ego. That's where the danger lies.
Totally. That's good stuff. You got any closing thoughts?
I like it. Let's close there.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate everyone, following us throughout the year. And, we're going to keep this thing rolling. We should have a new studio coming up pretty soon. Okay, so probably, start mid-February episodes, probably start being in the new studio, which would be pretty cool. If you're audio only, you won't notice. But if you watch on YouTube or see the clips on Instagram and stuff, you'll see that. But hope everyone closes out the year well. If you had a shit year, regroup, come out swinging. If you had a great year, hey, double down on what made you succeed. And sand those edges a little bit, fine tune your machine, and try to get even better going into this new year. I think, a lot of people talk shit on New Year's resolutions. I see why, but I also like the idea of people, kind of, it forces a reflection. All right, what do I want to do better? And while a lot of them don't play out, I at least like the exercise of people looking inward to be like, okay, what do I want to do differently? Now, in a perfect world, you're doing that all the time. But hey, if you got a couple New Year's resolutions, don't make that list too long. Focus on a few things, and I think after 6 weeks, something becomes a habit. So if you can get to mid-February, you might be there. And wish everyone a great break, and come back fresh, hopefully early January, and let's kick some ass this year. Anton?
Thanks, everybody.
All right, see ya.